On Zombie Reddit, today's story is...
My husband deactivated his location during a business trip, but 8 months of bank statements revealed an unforgivable secret that destroyed our entire family. Hello everyone, I'm Elena, I'm 30 years old. My whole world is falling apart, and I honestly don't know what to do right now. About a week ago, my husband Roberto, 32 years old, went on a business trip. As he is a sales executive, these week-long business trips are quite normal in our life. This time he told me he was going to Hartford, Connecticut. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary, so I didn't think much of it. But everything changed 3 days ago when my friend Mariana, 30 years old, called me, and that call turned my life completely upside down. Mariana lives in Los Angeles and was in a local bar when she ran into my husband. Yes, exactly, my husband was in Los Angeles, not in Hartford as he had told me. And he wasn't alone, she saw him with another woman. When Mariana confronted him directly, he replied quite naturally that she was a work colleague and that they were there on business. But they both left the establishment immediately afterwards, as if they had been caught doing something wrong. Mariana called me straight away. Elena, I've just seen Roberto in Los Angeles with a woman. I felt my heart sink. I asked her if she was completely sure if it might be someone who looked like him. But no, he had even taken a photograph. The image was not of the best quality, somewhat blurred, and the woman's face was not clearly distinguishable, but Roberto's was perfectly clear. It was definitely my husband, the same one who had assured me that he would be in Connecticut. I did not react immediately. I did not want to jump to conclusions. Perhaps there was a reasonable explanation. Maybe his work had sent him to Los Angeles at the last minute. But if that were the case, why hadn't he mentioned it to me? That same night Roberto called me. His voice sounded completely normal, as if everything was perfectly fine. Then, casually, as if he didn't want to bring it up, he said, "Oh, by the way, I ran into Mariana in Los Angeles." Los Angeles, not Connecticut. I immediately questioned him. "Wait a minute, you're in Los Angeles?" And then the justifications began. He said, "Oh yes, the plan suddenly changed. My boss sent me here at the last minute. I was so busy I didn't have time to let you know." I honestly wanted to believe him. I really tried. But there was something about the way he said it that didn't convince me. His tone of voice, the way he expressed it, it was as if he were reciting a prepared script, as if he had rehearsed that excuse before calling me. Then I remembered something important. A few weeks ago, he had gone on another business trip to Bridgeport, Connecticut. At the time, I hadn't thought much about it either, but now I had this nagging feeling of doubt. So I did something I wouldn't normally do. I checked our credit card statements, and guess what I found? He'd made purchases in Los Angeles during that same week. He'd been lying to me, not just on this occasion, but at least once before. That's when reality hit me. This wasn't just a work trip. I wasn't in Los Angeles by chance. I had gone specifically to see her. The same woman, on 2 different occasions. I did some more research and discovered that almost half the times he told me he was going to Connecticut for work, he was actually in Los Angeles. This had been going on for almost 8 months. I sat there, staring at my phone screen. My hands were shaking uncontrollably. The evidence was there, right in front of my eyes. He was being unfaithful to me. My husband, the man with whom I had shared my life for 6 years, to whom I had been married for 5, was cheating on me. And the most painful thing was that he hadn't even made an effort to cover his tracks well. He simply assumed that I would never check. He thought I would never question his stories. I felt physically sick. My stomach twisted into a tight knot. My head was spinning nonstop. I wanted to scream, cry my eyes out, throw something at the wall, but all I could do was sit there in stunned silence. I kept going over every detail in my mind. All the times he had been distant, all the nights he was too tired to talk, the times he seemed distracted, constantly checking his phone. The little disagreements that at the time didn't seem important. Now it all made sense. I couldn't sleep that night. I kept looking at my phone, checking our credit card transactions over and over again, looking for more evidence. I checked his social networks, his emails, at least the ones he had access to, his work calendar. I didn't even know exactly what I was looking for at that moment. More confirmation, more pain. And then, as my mind spiraled, I remembered something else. Roberto had deactivated the option to share his location. He never does that. We always share our locations, not because we are controlling, but out of habit. If he is traveling, I like to check that he has arrived at his destination safely. If I go out late, he likes to make sure that I got home safely. But he had deactivated it without telling me, and I hadn't realized until now. I didn't know what to do. My mind was racing. Roberto would be back in just 2 days, and I felt that time was running out for me to decide how to deal with the situation. The only thing I was clear about was that I didn't want to be there when he came back. I couldn't bear to listen to any more of his absurd excuses. I was completely exhausted and, to be honest, I felt too hurt to even look him in the face. So I did the only thing I felt I could do. I packed all my belongings, literally everything I had, and decided to leave. I went straight to my parents' house, which fortunately was only half an hour away. I needed space. I needed to get away from him. Being around him made me feel like I was losing my own identity, and I just couldn't tolerate it anymore. However, before leaving, I wanted to make sure that he had no way of denying what I had done. I printed out all our credit card statements showing charges in Los Angeles and highlighted all the important details with a marker. I also printed out that blurry photograph that Mariana had taken. It was a pixelated mess, but it didn't matter. The mental image of him with that woman was still perfectly clear in my head. I left all the evidence on the dining room table, like a time bomb. I didn't even leave an explanatory note. Honestly, I wasn't sure what I would have written anyway. Hi, I know you're a liar and a cheater. I'm leaving. No, I wasn't in the mood for that. Yesterday, Roberto returned from his trip and started calling me incessantly. He must have tried to contact me at least 10 times during the first few hours. He felt pathetic, to be honest. After everything that had happened, he really thought I would just answer the phone as if nothing was wrong. I wasn't going to answer. I didn't even want to hear his voice. I turned off my phone for a while just to have some peace of mind. I knew he would probably be desperate, but honestly, I didn't care anymore. I couldn't care at that moment. I needed time to breathe and think, so I wouldn't feel like I was drowning in this mess. I keep thinking about how I shared my life with him for so long, and now I feel like the rug has been pulled out from under me. I was so sure about our relationship, and now I feel like I don't even really know him. He's been my husband for 5 years, and I never imagined he was capable of something like this. I just can't process it. But now my mother insists that I should at least listen to him once. I don't know what to do. Do you have any suggestions? Should I take his call? Should I allow him to explain himself, or should I just keep my distance and stand firm in my decision? Update 1. Things have definitely taken an unexpected turn. My attempts to avoid Roberto didn't last as long as I had hoped, and, honestly, I'm surprised they lasted as long as they did. A day after posting my last update, he showed up at my parents' house. I thought maybe he would give me some space, but no, he wasn't willing to allow it. He stood there with an expression as if he were about to break down and flatly refused to leave until I listened to him. At first, I wasn't sure if I really wanted to hear what he had to say, but he insisted that he needed to explain himself. I refused to let him in and told him he could explain himself right there on the doorstep. I was prepared for the same lies, the same manipulation, but honestly, I had no idea what I was about to hear. He began by telling me that this whole problem had started about a year ago during one of his work conferences. According to him, he met this woman there, a coworker or something similar, and they exchanged phone numbers. He said they started talking, casually at first, but over time the conversations became more personal. He said they stayed in touch after the conference, and that's when things started to heat up between them. I didn't know how to react. I tried to keep my emotions under control, but I felt nauseous. He kept saying that he didn't even realize when things crossed the line of appropriateness. He talked about all this as if it were a simple, innocent slip, as if one thing had led to another and it wasn't really his responsibility. But no, he's an adult. He made his own decisions. He consciously chose to continue talking to her, to keep that relationship a secret. He tried to convince me that it was just physical, that it didn't mean anything deeper. He kept saying that it was all over and that he had ended it the same day that Mariana sent me that photograph, as if that somehow made it better. I couldn't hold back any longer. I said to him, "First of all, that doesn't make it any better at all. You've been lying to me for a whole year, Roberto." I could feel my voice trembling, and I hated how vulnerable I sounded, but I couldn't help it. And secondly, do you really expect me to believe that you've been traveling to Los Angeles every month just for physical encounters? How long do you think I'm going to believe such a story? I did not accept his excuses. I told him clearly, it doesn't matter if it ended or not. You have destroyed my trust, and I cannot get over something like that. The words seemed to come from someone else. I never imagined I would be in this position, and yet there I was, telling my husband that I could no longer trust him. I told him there was no going back. I didn't care if he was sorry, if he deeply regretted it. None of that had any relevance now. The damage was done. I couldn't pretend that everything was fine when clearly it wasn't. And I told him straight, you will soon be hearing from my divorce lawyer. It was as if I were speaking another language. Divorce. Us. It didn't seem real, but it was. I could see that he was trying to process everything I was saying, and it seemed like he was struggling to find what to do or say next. But I didn't care anymore. I had made my decision. I wasn't going to let him convince me otherwise. Not this time. I was completely exhausted from his lies, from constantly wondering if I was just a naive person who was easy to manipulate. And I slammed the door shut. I'm not going to lie. I felt as if I had been holding my breath for days. And finally I could breathe out deeply. It was as if a huge weight had been lifted from my shoulders. But at the same time, it all felt unreal. I still couldn't believe this was happening. I didn't want it to happen. I didn't want to end my marriage, but I had no choice. He had crossed a line from which he could never return. Update 2. Hello everyone. It's been about a month since my last update, but so much has happened in that time. I just didn't have the energy or, to be honest, the mental strength to sit down and write it all down. But here I am, finally ready to tell you everything that happened. I was in the middle of working with my lawyer, figuring out what the next steps would be, when I got a call from an unknown number. It was Roberto's cousin, Liliana, 35. I knew Liliana. We weren't particularly close, but we had shared enough moments together that I wasn't too surprised by her call. I barely answered and said hello. She went straight to the point. She told me that Roberto was really devastated and that she had gone to his house to console him because he was completely distraught by the whole situation. And honestly, that made me furious. Really? I understand that he's your family and all, but was she really calling me to try to make me feel bad for him? After everything he did, after lying right to my face, cheating on me, and then trying to minimize everything as if it were a simple, insignificant mistake. I almost laughed at how absurd it all was, but instead of losing my composure, I simply took a deep breath and asked, "Are you okay?" She paused as if waiting for me to say something more. When I didn't, she simply went on to talk about how Roberto deeply regretted everything that had happened and was completely lost without me, how he cried constantly because he couldn't believe what he had done. At that moment, I was sitting there holding my phone up to my ear, completely perplexed by what I was hearing. I mean, maybe he really was crying, maybe he genuinely regretted it, but what did she expect me to do with that information? Magically forget everything and go back to him as if nothing had happened? I said to her, "Liliana, I understand that he's affected, but he made his own choices. He chose to lie. He chose to be unfaithful, and now he must face the consequences of his actions." She was silent for a moment. I thought that perhaps that would be the end of the conversation, but no. Then she began to talk about how she hadn't realized how much Roberto and I had been struggling in our relationship, and that all couples go through ups and downs, and that marriage is not always perfect. My God, I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I literally had to close my eyes and count to 5 to keep from exploding. I took another deep breath and said firmly, "Liliana, this isn't something I can just get over. It's not a silly misunderstanding, it's infidelity, it's constantly lying, and I can't trust him anymore." And before he could try to throw another manipulative argument at me, I hung up. Let me clarify that I never hang up on people. I hate doing it, but at that moment I knew that if I stayed on the phone for 1 second longer, I would start screaming or crying my eyes out, and I wasn't going to give her or Roberto that satisfaction. But something was still bothering me. I didn't want to do it, but I checked the security cameras at home, and there they were, in my backyard, kissing passionately, Roberto and Liliana. I was completely disgusted. I mean, they're second cousins, but they're still cousins. I wanted to throw up with disgust. I honestly thought I had already hit rock bottom with this whole situation, but apparently there was still room to fall lower. I don't even know how to put into words how absolutely disgusted I felt at that moment. It was as if my whole body had completely frozen. I was staring at the screen, watching my husband kissing his own cousin in the backyard of our house. I think I sat there for 10 whole minutes, staring at the screen, my brain refusing to process what I was witnessing. As if there had to be some logical explanation, right? Maybe I was so emotionally exhausted that I was misinterpreting the images. Maybe it wasn't as bad as it seemed. I zoomed in, I rewound the footage, I watched it over and over and over again. There was no possible mistake, no misinterpretation, no other plausible explanation. Roberto and Liliana were in my backyard, kissing passionately. I felt physically ill. I'm not exaggerating. I had to run to the bathroom because I thought I was going to throw up. When I finally managed to calm down enough to think clearly, I did the only thing I could think of at the time. I immediately sent Mariana a message telling her that I urgently needed her to confirm something, that it was really important. I sent her a photograph of Liliana and asked her if it was the same woman she had seen with Roberto in that bar. It took Mariana a few minutes to reply, and during those minutes, I was literally holding my breath. I think part of me already knew what she was going to say, but I kept praying that I was wrong. She replied that yes, she was indeed the woman I had seen in the bar. I explained to her who she really was, that Liliana was not simply an unknown woman that Roberto had met on a work trip, but that she was in fact his cousin. Mariana's immediate response was, "What the hell?" At that moment, I was just pacing back and forth in my parents' house, trying to figure out what I was supposed to do with this information. Because infidelity is one thing, lying is another, but being unfaithful to your own cousin, that's on a whole different level of repulsive behavior that I was not prepared for. I couldn't hold back any longer. I drove straight to our house and banged on the door. When I arrived, it was Liliana who opened the door. And the audacity of this woman. I could see the guilt reflected in every inch of her face, but she still had the nerve to act surprised to see me standing there, as if she didn't know exactly why I had come, as if I were just an unexpected visitor rudely interrupting their evening, instead of the legitimate wife of the man with whom he was having a clandestine affair. For a second, she simply stood there, frozen. I pushed her out of my way and went straight in. Roberto was in the kitchen, standing by the worktop with a glass of whiskey in his hand, as if he were just relaxing peacefully, as if he hadn't just been caught in the middle of the most disgusting betrayal I had ever experienced. When he saw me, his whole body visibly tensed, and in that instant I knew. I knew that he had been waiting for this moment. I knew that I would eventually find out, but I had hoped to have more time to come up with some ridiculous excuse. I told him straight out that I knew everything. I laid out every detail, every lie. I told him that I knew full well that Liliana was the woman he had been cheating on me with. Of course, he tried to deny it, because of course, that was his first instinct. He scoffed as if I were completely mad, as if I were the one making baseless accusations. I could see him searching for the right words, something he could manipulate to make himself look like the victim in this situation. But then I took out my phone, opened the security camera video, and played it in front of him. I didn't say a word. I just held the phone up, letting the truth speak for itself. And that was the moment he realized he had no way out. His face lost all color, and for the first time since I entered the house, he really looked guilty. Not because he truly felt it. No, that would require having a genuine conscience. He looked guilty only because he had been caught. And then the whole truth came out, the absolute, disgusting and horrible truth. This wasn't just a recent affair. It wasn't a mistake he'd made in a moment of weakness. No, this had started even before we'd met years ago. He and Liliana had been involved long before I came into his life, but apparently they ended the relationship when we got married and then, 2 years ago, picked up exactly where they'd left off. 2 whole years. 2 years of my life completely wasted on a man who had been having a clandestine relationship with his own cousin. My stomach churned again. I felt physically sick. My hands gripped my phone so tightly I thought I might break it. My mind couldn't even begin to process what I had just heard. This wasn't just betrayal. It wasn't just infidelity. It was something much more disturbing. I didn't scream. I didn't cry out. I didn't even allow myself to react in the way that my body instinctively wanted to. Instead, I simply turned and walked out the door because at that moment there was absolutely nothing left to say. Update 3. Hello everyone. It's been 2 weeks since my last update, and I have quite a bit to share with you. After everything that happened when I confronted Roberto, I felt furious, so angry that I couldn't stay still in one place. I wasn't even sure what I was supposed to do next, but one thing was perfectly clear. I wanted to do something that would make him feel even a small fraction of what I was feeling. Revenge, I guess. It sounds drastic, but at that moment I felt that I needed some kind of justice rather than just sitting there and letting my thoughts get completely out of control. Without thinking too much about it, I got in my car and drove straight to their parents' house. I'm not particularly proud of going straight to them, but at that moment I felt they deserved to know the whole truth. Their parents live approximately 2 hours away, so by the time I arrived at their house, it was almost 7 p.m. As I entered their driveway, I had this heavy feeling in my stomach. I wasn't entirely sure what exactly I was going to tell them. I mean, how do you even begin to explain something of this nature? How do you tell people who have treated you like part of their family for years that their son has been betraying you in such a horrible way? I could tell that they had no idea what was really going on. They knew that Roberto and I were taking some time apart, but that was all they knew. I guess they assumed it was just a typical bump in the road of any marriage, not something of the magnitude of what had really happened. They were genuinely surprised to see me turn up unannounced, and I could see the genuine concern on their faces as I entered the room. They greeted me with that warm and welcoming hug as they always did, but this time it felt incredibly strange. I wasn't sure if I was walking into a conversation where they would offer me understanding and support, or if they would be completely angry when I revealed the truth to them. We sat down around the kitchen table, and I simply told them everything without beating about the bush. I told them directly that we were getting a divorce. Their reactions were exactly what I expected. Initial confusion, absolute shock, and then lots and lots of questions. Their mother immediately asked what had happened, and their father just looked at me with a completely blank expression, as if he couldn't properly process the words I was uttering. Honestly, I couldn't blame them. I mean, who would believe something like that if they didn't see it with their own eyes? I didn't hold back at all. I told them absolutely everything. All about the infidelity, about the video of Roberto and Liliana, about how I discovered it, how I confronted him, how I felt like I was living in some distorted version of my own life. I showed them the video, and the look on their faces as they watched it was enough to break anyone's heart. Their mother started crying almost immediately. I'm pretty sure she felt as betrayed as I did. How could she not feel that way? I had shared so many holidays with them, spent hours and hours talking to them about life, and now I was the one who had to give them the worst news imaginable. His father remained silent, which I guess was his way of processing all this devastating information. I know he was deeply disappointed. I could see it clearly in his eyes, but he didn't say anything at first. He just looked at his wife and then returned his attention to the video. His mother, on the other hand, was already asking how she could help me in this situation. She told me that she felt very sorry for me, that none of this was my fault, and that no matter what happened, I would always be considered part of her family. It was then that I realized how much I was really going to miss them. They had been incredibly kind to me all these years, and now I was simply going to walk away from that relationship. I told them that I still wanted to keep in touch with them, that I didn't want to completely cut the ties that bound us, no matter what happened with Roberto. I wasn't angry with them. None of this was their responsibility. But even though they tried to comfort me and assure me that everything would be okay eventually, I felt this enormous weight on my chest that wouldn't go away. We talked some more. They continued to ask questions, wanting to understand how long this had been going on and how I had found out and if there was any possibility, no matter how small, of saving our marriage. I told them clearly that there was no chance. I had absolutely no trust left in him, and I wasn't going to forgive someone who had crossed such an important line. I didn't even know if I could ever look at Roberto in the same way again, let alone try to rebuild a relationship with him from scratch. They didn't pressure me to change my mind, but I could tell they were struggling internally with the reality of everything I had just told them. After leaving Roberto's parents' house, I didn't know exactly what to expect. I thought that maybe they would try to intervene in some way, or at least give me some kind of emotional closure, but as the days went by, I didn't hear anything from them. What I did receive was a call from Roberto's sister. Roberto's parents are very religious people, And I knew full well that if anyone was going to be really affected by what had happened, it would be them. They have always been extremely strict about family values, so when I went to their house and told them the whole truth, I think they were completely shocked. I left their house that night without really being sure what would happen next. I didn't expect them to support me in the way that I had hoped, but part of me thought that maybe they would try to reconcile things between Roberto and me, or at least talk to him about it. But none of that happened. They just seemed paralyzed by disbelief. Then, yesterday I got a call from Roberto's sister. She wanted to meet with me to talk. Honestly, I wasn't sure if I was emotionally ready for that, but I agreed. I wasn't expecting any big revelations, but I was curious to hear what she had to say. When I met with her, she told me that after everything that had happened, the family had had a serious conversation with Roberto. It turns out that his parents were absolutely furious when they discovered the full extent of what he had been doing, especially with Liliana. She told me that they couldn't believe it and that it went totally against all the values they stood for. They had tried to make him understand the gravity of his actions, but he had flatly refused to end his relationship with Liliana. His parents were extremely clear with him about how unacceptable all this was, but instead of taking responsibility or understanding the seriousness of the situation, he simply stood firm in his position. He told them straight that he had no intention of cutting his ties with Liliana, and, honestly, I wasn't surprised at all. I don't know if it was pure stubbornness or simply a complete disregard for everything, but Roberto simply refused to listen to anyone. At that point, Roberto's family took a completely firm stance. They officially decided to disown him. They told him that they could no longer have a relationship with him and that they deeply regretted everything I was going through. It's strange because, although I was hurt and furious about everything that had happened, I couldn't help feeling a certain relief at knowing that they were firmly against his actions. I suppose part of me had feared that they would somehow try to excuse his behavior or try to justify it, but I was glad to know that they had done their best to make it clear that they did not support this and that they were willing to remove him from their lives. I was still processing all this information when Roberto's sister revealed to me that the entire family had cut off communication with both him and Liliana. She explained that even members of the extended family that I barely knew were deeply upset by the whole affair. They were all horrified by the infidelity and the way it had developed. I mean, I could never have imagined a situation like this, and I'm sure they were just as disgusted as I felt. But here's what really gets to me. Despite being completely cut off from their family, Roberto and Liliana are continuing with their relationship. From what Roberto's sister told me, it doesn't look like they intend to stop anytime soon. They're just carrying on as if nothing had happened. No regrets, no sincere apologies. It's almost as if they don't even care about the destruction they've caused in their wake. Thank you all for the unconditional support you have given me during this very difficult process. I greatly appreciate everyone who has sent me messages of encouragement, shared helpful advice, or simply been there to listen to me. I will keep you updated as things progress, but for now, this is how I am doing. I am still trying to take it all in, but striving to stay strong day by day.